John, happy to have you here. So, John, I have read your LinkedIn. I've checked out your website, but I would just love a 50-foot view. Who is John Graham?
My bumper sticker, Manuel, is I'm lucky to be alive. Whole first half of my life was one scary ass adventure after the other. I mean, I was just drunk on adrenaline, and I kept walking away from a lot of stuff. Some of it was climbing big, dangerous mountains. I mean, I've done some pretty impressive stuff out there in the rock and ice, first ascents and the like. And the rest of it was more or less in the U.S. Foreign Service, where I wasn't in embassies in Europe, but I was in wars and revolutions in Africa and Asia, mostly dodging bullets and whatever. I was in the middle of the revolution in Libya, for example. Then I spent a year and a half in the war in Vietnam. I asked the State Department to send me to the most dangerous place they had, and they did. It happened to be the city of Hue, which was just 50 miles south of what was then the dividing line between North and South Vietnam. And it was a hell of a dangerous place to be in 1971, 72, because all the American troops had been withdrawn with the agreement that Nixon signed. So there were just a couple of us civilians left up there, basically surrounded on three sides by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. That was really interesting, especially the so-called Easter Offensive, when the NVA, North Vietnamese Army, almost conquered Vietnam. Didn't quite do it. Took them 3 more years. But I was there when they attacked Hue, and it was an incredible battle, and I was right in the middle of it. But also, aside from the bullets flying, it was also the place where my life began to turn around. Because I was then 29 years old, as a matter of fact, which I understand is about your age. There I was. I suddenly realized that I was in the middle of this war. I never believed in the war in Vietnam. As soon as I got there, I saw that it was stupid and unwinnable. The only reason I was there, I volunteered to go. Nobody drafted me. I wasn't wearing a uniform. The only reason I went there was for the adrenaline rush, because I'd never been in a shooting war before. So hell, what bigger adventure could there be than people trying to kill me and me trying to kill other people? I mean, that's how screwed up my life was at the time. But anyway, in the middle of this battle, it suddenly just came to me with a rush, how shallow my life had become. I mean, my home was 8,000 miles away, and like I said, I didn't give a damn about the war or its aims. I wasn't there as a patriot, and yet I was senior enough so that decisions I was making were life and death decisions, setting up firing squads, stuff like that, and I realized that I couldn't do that. I wasn't an immoral person. I didn't think a bad person, but there I was without any caring for other people. All I cared about was myself. And it wasn't that I was a 17-year-old kid. I was 29. And it got me how shallow that was. And I realized then that I had to crawl out of that hole. It turned out that I survived that battle because carrier jets from American warships off the coast were finally able to fly when the clouds cleared and blasted the NVA troops, which were at that point only 6 miles from the city gates. So I came back and went to what were then called encounter groups in California, which basically were a bunch of people who got together trying to explain their lives and get recommendations and maybe comfort from other people. And it helped a lot. It sounds crazy, but it helped a lot. A lot of people said that, hey, we get off with this John Wayne thing. That's not who you are. You actually are a caring, feeling person, and you're trying to tell all of us that you're John Wayne, but you're not. We get your adventure stories. We get that you're big and tough and smart. But the fact is that you're not a bad guy, and you need to reshape your life. Whew. Took me a while. I was there in California for a year, nominally studying at Stanford, but mostly trying to get my handle on myself. I guess now you'd call it PTSD. I mean, I had nightmares and all kinds of stuff going on. I'd walk on the shadowy side of the streets in Palo Alto, California, to avoid sniper fire. I mean, I was screwed up. And then there's this huge challenge from these encounter groups as how to reshape my life. I gradually began to crawl out of that hole. First thing was becoming a better father to my two kids, and then beginning to establish relationships with other people. And I began to see that other people actually could like me without me being this John Wayne type, and I could actually lead teams and lead other people without threatening them and without bullying them. And I gradually began to crawl out of that. And also, and I guess this is most important, I began to care about other people and other things. For example, in my foreign service career, I'd seen an awful lot of death and destruction and poverty and disease. And I didn't care about it, but now I did. And now I realize that with my smarts and my skills, I could actually do some good in the world. So I began to look at that and reshaping my life. And I did. I ended up at the United Nations, for example, a few years later, when I had really made a U-turn in my life. And I did a lot of good things I'm quite proud of, bringing more peace and justice, especially to the so-called third world, the poor countries of Africa and Asia. I helped end apartheid, for example, something I'm very proud of. So, you know, I pulled myself out of that hole, and for the rest of my life now, 40-some years since then, I've devoted my whole life toward using my skills and the courage that I have to make the world a better place, operating mostly through the Giraffe Heroes Project, which is a nonprofit. I didn't start it. My wife, Ann, did. I fell madly in love with her. And then I fell in love with what she was doing. It's very simple. The Giraffe Project simply finds people sticking their necks out, taking risks. They're men, women, whatever, and they're trying to solve public problems, everything from poverty to crimes against women to whatever. And we tell their stories and in that way inspire other people to stick their necks out too. I mean, it's an ancient strategy, been around for 100,000 years, but it works. So that's what I've been doing for the last 42 years. I've written a bunch of books, podcasts, articles, all on the theme of having the courage to look deep into your own soul, which I finally had done in my life, and find something there that was beyond the third quarter earnings if you were a business person, or beyond just satisfying your own needs, about giving back, about solving public problems. And I knew enough then to really help people, give them some serious advice on how to stick their necks out without getting their heads cut off. So I've been doing that for 42 years since. So that's a hell of a long answer, taking up too much time, but it's a big story, and it's a complicated story.
Absolutely. And no, take all the time you need. So now you're currently the executive director of the Giraffe Project, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And like I say, I didn't start it. I want to be very careful of this because Ann, my wife, and my business partner is probably going to see this podcast. I want to make sure she gets credit. She was a single mother living in New York City, and I met her while I was still at the United Nations. And like I say, he fell madly in love. And initially, I thought storytelling, which is what Ann was. She knew the power of story. She was an editor and writer. I thought, I was so full of myself. I thought, oh, well, now that I've turned my life around and I'm an engine for good, I'll start giving a bunch of speeches because I'm really good at speaking. I'm really good on my feet. I knew that. And I started giving a bunch of speeches. Then it was the middle of the Cold War, so I gave a lot of speeches on peacemaking and stuff. And very few people came. I just didn't get it. But people were flocking to what Ann was doing. And she was finding these stories of people sticking their necks out and then putting their stories making little 3-4 minute vignettes. She'd get a movie star or a stage star to do the voiceover. And she'd send these vignettes out to rinky-dink little radio stations, or she'd send them out with fax machines, and gradually grew. In a few years, she had a big story on her in the New York Times, and she was off and running. About that time, I met her, and I realized that what she was doing We were both trying to do the same thing. We were both trying to make the world a better place, but she was doing it far more effectively than I was because she knew how to tell stories. So I learned from her. And not only did I fall in love with her, but I fell in love with what she was doing. I became a storyteller myself, and I understood the power of story. And that's the engine for everything Ann and I have done since with the Giraffe Project, all about people sticking their necks out and us telling their stories. Yeah. So
do you have a favorite story from the Giraffe Project, or is there one specific kind of instance that really ingrained it in you?
Yeah. Well, as you might imagine, since we've been doing this for 40 some years, so we've found and told the stories of almost 2,000 of these. We call them Giraffe Heroes. And of course, they're men and women, they're black and they're brown, and they're young and they're old. But they're all doing similar things. They're all taking risks to make life better. And their stories have a certain similarity. They're doing good, but they're not just doing good. They're risking their lives sometimes, their livelihoods. They're risking opprobrium and being tossed out of their communities. They're whistleblowers being fired from their companies, all kinds of risks. I'll tell you, I mean, the things that are sticking in my head, of course, are the most recent ones. I just did oh, yeah, I'll tell you more about this later if we have time, but I just started about 5 months ago doing short form videos on TikTok because I want to reach a younger audience, that is to say, people your age. So I just said, I was told that TikTok was the way to do that. And it couldn't be longer than 3 minutes because of the attention spans and all that. So I've been working hard on that and telling the stories. I tell the story of one of my adventures in a minute and a half and then draw some kind of life lessons tied to that story. Anyway, what I want to tell you is that just last week I recorded the story, not of my own adventures, but of one of these giraffe heroes. And it's an extraordinary story. It's a woman named Missy Cummings, who is a robotics expert, and she was working at a university doing research into self-driving cars. And she found out that despite the advertising of the companies that built them, like Tesla, they were quite unsafe, and that the technical parts of it had not been worked out. It was like Elon Musk and all those people were saying, you move fast and break it. Well, they were putting these things on the market, and according to Missy Cummings, they were still damn dangerous. They weren't ready to be put on the market yet. So she began writing about how dangerous they were, whereupon Musk got her fired from the university. She gets hired by the U.S. Department of Transportation to continue her work. And Musk steamrolls the Department of Transportation, so she gets fired from that too, told to shut up, but she didn't, and she's become perhaps the most loudest voice, calling a pause in the production and approval of self-driving cars because they're just not safe enough, and public safety was really important to her. And Musk completely underestimated her. She'd been a Navy fighter pilot for 11 years, for God's sake. She was tough as nails. And he took on the wrong person, and she let him have it. And so she stood up to the richest man in the world, and she's still a major factor in keeping a close watch on self-driving cars and forbidding their mass distribution until the safety concerns are worked out. So she's taking an enormous risk by crossing people like Musk. I love that story, and there are lots of others. There are environmental stories. Some of the stories are from Africa and Asia. We have 7 overseas affiliates, by the way. And I'm in charge of that in particular. And I won't tell you one story because there's about 15 or 20. They're all about the same. They're about women in Africa, in some of the more backward parts of Africa, in some of the rural jungle areas, which are still run by tribal chiefs, doing things the same way that they have for 1,000 years. And a lot of those is subjugating women. Not just subjugating them in the sense of just depriving them of their constitution or legal rights, but physically molesting them. You probably heard, some of you know, they do some awful things to teenage women and girls in Africa because that's the way their great grandparents did it, and they won't stop. And so other young women have waded right into this and demanded from their governments to stop this female mutilation. And that means taking on the tribal chiefs who still have enormous power. And they all try to kill them, of course. They all try to find these women and kill them. And these women are intrepid. They not only tell other women that they don't have to submit to this, that they can have political power. They can be tribal chiefs themselves. They can take advantage of the new constitutions in places like Sierra Leone and Uganda and demand their civil rights and legal rights and voting rights. So they are enormous engines for change, and they're risking their lives. And so, there thousands more stories. Interesting that I told the stories of two women, because I think if 2,000 people, 60% of them are women. You may not, some of your listeners, viewers may be surprised at that. People sticking their neck out over 42 years. We try to be even-handed, but more than half of them are women.
That's impressive. Where can people learn more about it? Where could they potentially donate or become a part of it?
Sure. Giraffe.org, really simple. The Giraffe Heroes Project, our website is Giraffe, Giraffe. I spell that because many people don't know how to spell giraffe.
I was going to say, thank you for spelling that.
Yeah, giraffe.org, and it's a pretty good, well-organized website. And you can, first of all, you can get into that library of 2,000 stories, and you can spend a week reading them if you want to. And of course, there's a donate button on it if you want to give us some money. We're a nonprofit. We always need it. And there's a bit of our history there. Oh, yeah, there's a couple of pages. Beginning in 1990, we started writing a K-12 curriculum, helping people from kindergarten through high school build lives as courageous and compassionate citizens, and that's helped a lot. We've sent our curricula all around the English-speaking world, and now it's translated into Spanish. So we're doing that as well, and that's well described. Anyway, giraffe.org. My own website is almost as simple. It's my name, johngraham.org. And it sounds like you've already been there, and it's got everything in there from my sordid biography to everything else. The tick. I really, I love it so much. The 3-minute videos I'm making on TikTok, I've done about 35 of them now, all under the theme of badass granddad. Badass, all one word. Granddad with 2 Ds. And so all you have to do is go on TikTok and use the search box and type in badass granddad to get those stories. So that's badass granddad. And finally, I'm not flogging books here, but I did write a memoir, which I think is pretty good. It's called Quest, Quest, Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning. Get it from Amazon or order it from your bookstore or whatever. Now, what else? That's about it, I guess. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. But those are all different ways. And also, I get a lot of mail and stuff, but I love it. I spend a fair amount of each day answering it. And so my own personal website is graham@giraffe.org. So if people have a good thing to say or a bad thing to say or pondering some question that has to do with courage and meaning and service, I'm the go-to guy.
That's awesome. I wanted to read this. On LinkedIn, you have that you are a global peace builder as your job title. And it says, often working with groups such as Initiatives of Change, Graham has helped secure a ceasefire with the, sorry if I mess this up, Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, end a major strike in Canada, defeat a dictator in Zimbabwe, craft peace initiatives in the Middle East, expose Chinese cultural genocide in Tibet, and mediate environmental battles in the United States, from saving the Everglades to creating sensible land policies in the Pacific Northwest. How did
All-
you find the time? Like,
That's
that's crazy.
Man, that's all true, man.
Yeah.
I went in the Middle East. I had a very, very small role in crafting the Oslo Accords way back in the late '90s, early teens, early 20th first century, between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We came pretty damn close. A lot closer than we are now, of course, achieving some kind of a two-state solution. And what I want to say about that is, although our effort failed, it did have the impact of causing me all kinds of grief with the U.S. government, because I, as a peace builder, I knew, and it's common sense, that you kind of have to really understand both sides, the warring parties. You can't just pick one side. So I pretty much understood the Israeli side of this, their complaints and all that. I mean, they were getting pretty tired of Palestinians strapping bombs around themselves and blowing up buses in Tel Aviv. But I wanted to get the other side of the story, because there's a Palestinian side of the story too. After all, in the creation of the State of Israel was created only by shoving a whole lot of Palestinians out of their traditional homes into refugee camps in places like Gaza. So the Palestinians had a story, and I needed to learn it. So I went down to a Palestinian refugee camp run by Hamas during the George W. Bush presidency, and I had a long talk with them about the Palestinian side of the story, the fact that their grandparents had been thrown out of Israel, basically, and the fact that the Arabs that remained were second and third class citizens, et cetera, et cetera. They had and have a lot of gripes, a lot of legitimate concerns. They're by no means just wild ass terrorists. They have legitimate concerns, and I wanted to find out what they were. So I listened and listened and listened and listened. So I finished that. I'm coming back, and I'm hauled off at the Paris airport, taken down to a small windowless room, because everywhere there's a camera, right? So the French Secret Services knew I was in that camp, knew that I talked to Hamas leaders, and they grilled me on what was going on. Finally let me on a plane. I thought that might be the end of it, but that was naive. 2 weeks later, I'm flying down to California from Seattle to see my granddaughters, and I get to the airport, and as soon as I present my passport, I'm given a letter, official U.S. government letter, saying that I'm a threat to national security and to civil aviation, and I'm on something called the no-fly list. Aha. Well, I talked my way onto that plane to California at that time, but I'm hassled badly ever since then, because of this no-fly list. But they picked the wrong guy. I'm kind of like that fighter bomber pilot, the womanist story I told you. They picked the wrong guy, because I'm smart and tough and I know how to deal with conflict. I become the ACLU's poster boy in bashing the government on the excesses of the security regulations imposed after 9/11. I mean, after 9/11, we were all scared, right? And the government way overdid it in terms of taking away civil rights in order to, quote, keep us safe. So the no-fly list was part of that. And they were sweeping up all kinds of people and taking away our civil liberties. I spent 3 days on the Hill for lobbying with Congress. Interesting thing was, but best reception I got was from Republicans, not Democrats, which I thought was really interesting. So I made some good Republican friends, and I spent a lot of time on the air and broadcasts and stuff, criticizing the Bush administration for this no-fly list. Anyway, that list has since become a kind of a joke, because someone found a 2-year-old baby on it, and some movie stars and some other stuff, because it was very crude. Kind of reminds you what's going on now, I think, with some of the stuff, some of the roundups being done by Musk and Trump, and it's like a lot of it is really chaotic, and that's the way it was then. And I'm concerned now because I was told way back then that my name would never be taken off this no-fly list, and there's still a page that the White House has somewhere that I'm a threat to national security. So I got to think seriously about going to Canada for a vacation because they may not let me back, or they may throw me into a prison in El Salvador. I don't know what. Anyway, so there we are. And the other things, there's a story behind each one. The very first one you mentioned, by the way, the pronunciation is Khmer Rouge. They were the bunch of I don't know what you call them. They were terrorists. They were ideological idiots that thought they could turn all of Cambodia into a commune, and they killed 1 million people out of 6 million people. It was just terrible. Anyway, they were finally defeated, except for a small remnant stuck in an enclave in the northwest part of the country. And they were still capable of hit and run raids and stuff, so the country was still unsettled. And I went over there to try to mediate a ceasefire between this remnant of the Khmer Rouge and the Cambodian government. Interesting part of that story, I go to this place, this rendezvous where this negotiation is supposed to take place, right? And this guy walks in. And he's the terrorist leader, the Khmer Rouge guy, and he's dressed way better than I am. His shoes are shined. He has his Paris suit on, and he starts with the party line, of course, that they were totally innocent and that it was all the other guy's fault, yada yada yada. And I finally just stopped him because I hadn't come halfway around the world to listen to his bullshit. And so I stopped him and I asked him directly about his family, and he pulls his head back because he's not used to being interrupted. He's a big shot, right? And he says, "My family. Well, I'm Mr. Graham. My family is right now being bombed by the government warplanes because they're in a village not that far from here. And so he was having. Yeah, I said, "Are you worried about them?" He says, "Yeah, of course I'm worried about them." So we get talking a little bit beyond his PR propaganda stuff. And we get to talk a little bit about our personal lives, and I ask him how he joined the Khmer Rouge, this totally mad, insane group of killers. And he says, "Well, I joined the Khmer Rouge because I went over to Vietnam as a volunteer to help the North Vietnamese fight you guys in the war, and your war in Vietnam." I says, "Well, that's interesting because I also was in Vietnam, of course, on the other side." I asked him where he was stationed. He says he was with a group of NVA troops that were besieging the city of Hue in the northern part. I said, "Oh, that's interesting." I said, "I was in Hue helping to defend it." "And when were you there?" He named the exact time when I was there. So we were both there at the same time on either sides, probably no more than 10 miles from each other on both sides, either side. And so I say to him, we could have met before. He kind of smiles for the first time. And then he says with half a smile, "Yeah, I think we met over gun sights." So from that moment on, there was a certain almost camaraderie. And we got down to serious negotiations. And in point of fact, the ceasefire was arranged within 6 months after that meeting, so I succeeded. But it was all because I took the risk of torpedoing the whole thing just by getting personal, which is one of the most important things I learned about resolving conflict. And you named a half a dozen or a dozen places, environmental stuff. The other things I've helped mediate, it's all about getting personal, and I've done a lot of that. So, and I've written books on it. I didn't mention that, but yeah, I wrote a book called "Stick Your Neck Out," which is everything I learned about resolving conflicts and civic action. I'm talking too much. You ask one question, I keep answering 10, but
no. Every question has a ton of layers behind it. You keep going just as you're going. Don't limit yourself here.
All right.
So what was it like writing Quest, Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning? Like,
Oh
what was
boy.
that process? Yeah, like, what was the process? What was the mindset that went into it?
The first thing was to make a decision that this would be an honest book. I was going to tell the true story because I started off writing this book as a book on Vietnam, quite frankly, because I had a lot of material. I came back from Vietnam with like 6 inches of documents, classified and unclassified documents on the war. And I was going to write the tell-all book on Vietnam. But then I realized soon after I got back that everybody was writing a tell-all book on Vietnam, and mine wouldn't be any better than somebody else's. So I said, no, that's not really not the story anyway. You know, the story is about me, quite frankly. The story is about that battle in Vietnam and that being the lowest point in my life and me discovering the truth about myself, because that also was the truth about the war. I says, that's the story I want to write. And I'm going to write that story, and I'm going to be completely honest, not just on the politics of it, but honest about myself and the hole I'd sunk into. So I started doing that. And the first part of the book was pretty easy to write, other than because it was all about my early adventures. I was a young man then, so climbing mountains and doing some of the wild ass stuff was just a good story, good storytelling. As I began to get older then, joined the Foreign Service, however, I began to get into more and more serious stuff, culminating in my late 20s with that battle in Vietnam. And that's where it got difficult, the shift from an adrenaline junkie to someone whose whole life has been ever since devoted toward peacemaking and helping other people. How did I make that shift? And when I got down to the hole I'd sunk into, again, I reminded myself I was going to tell the friggin' truth. When I described my descent into that hole, and this kind of answers your question, there were some months when I couldn't write. I would just break down and cry. I would just break down and cry as I delved deeper and deeper and deeper into it, about how shallow my life had become, how I had let it become that shallow. And then all of the pain I felt in California, struggling to climb out of it by fits and starts, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It was really painful, but I stuck to it. And so if nothing else, that book is an honest book. And it tells the story as honestly as I can, not about the war in Vietnam. That's just 4 or 5 chapters, but the story of the transition of a young man totally caught up in adventure to the point almost of psychotic, or whatever. I was like, it was crazy. And then gradually finding that he had a place in the real world of helping people and what that meant, and the tremendous joy the young man, me, John, felt at doing things like solving that crisis in Cambodia, or helping look at negotiations in the Middle East, or working with the Giraffe Heroes Project, or helping end apartheid. Those are things that I had done, and they had brought such pleasure to my own life, and they'd actually helped make the world a better place. And the turnaround was dramatic. So I described the turnaround as well, and what happened afterward. But the key answer to your question is, it took a long time because the hard parts were hard, and it was hard to be that honest. But I was, and I'm proud of that. It's a good book.
That's awesome. It's very tough to just bury yourself like that, and to do it at such a stage, writing a book, putting yourself out there, and then for the whole world to see. This isn't something that, like a personal diary or personal journal, something that you're truly doing for everyone. Do you feel like writing the book was a transition, or do you think that you would have gotten the same thing out of it even without the book?
Now, that book was like $1 million of psychotherapy. In writing that book, it forced me look and to look for explanations and for, to examine things like my relationship with my father, for example, whatever, my quest for manhood and how I got down on so many wrong tracks of thinking that real men were tough and violent, and how did I get there? How did I get out? And it's like, yeah, it was all the kind of, like I say, it was like $1 million worth of psychotherapy. So writing that book really helped me, because I don't know if I ever could have gotten that honest, because I had to write the book. I had to finish a chapter. It forced me to get back on the horse and to try to complete the paragraphs that were so hard to write the day before. I'm not sure I would have done that if it had not been the pressure of getting that book out. So I credit writing that book with being a major impact on my own transition to, what shall I say, a decent human being.
Do you feel like you have any regrets in your life?
I'm asked that question a lot. I've had the power over life and death. I was in a shooting war. I set up firing squads. No question that some people are dead because of what I did. There's no question that I ruined some lives, or at least negatively affected lots of other lives through my ambition and not cruelty, but unseeingness, ignorance. So, yeah, in a way, I look back at that and there are regrets. But on the other hand, the main thing I think I'd say to myself, and I think I say this honestly, was that my current life, which I think has a pretty important engine for positive change, I wouldn't be nearly as powerful in doing what I'm doing now had it not been for that first part, had I not hit bottom. Okay? And so I'm well aware of the huge arc, or in my case, the trough of what it took. And I see a lot of other people, especially young men, heading down into that same trough. And because I've been there and in a worse place than almost any of them, I guess, I can sympathize, and I'm a good mentor to young men because I can sympathize. The other thing is, and this is more crass, I guess, but before COVID, I spent a lot of time, not on the internet, but in physically public speaking, running all around the planet, giving big deal speeches, sometimes it would be to a hotel ballroom full of people. Sometimes it would be to a C-suite with a dozen people, the board of directors or whatever. But I did a lot of public speaking, and I realized early on there was no point in me preaching to the choir. So I deliberately sought out tough audiences, which in the most cases were business audiences, who were very concerned with third quarter earnings, and they were kind of bored to listen to a guy who ran a nonprofit, and he was telling them to do good. I mean, give me a break. So if they gave me 45 minutes, for example, if I was given 45 minutes to give a speech, I would spend 35 minutes telling my war stories, which, as you've probably gathered, I have plenty of. My adventure stories. And so in 35 minutes, everybody in that room understands that I've done more tough, adventuresome stuff than the whole room of them would ever think of doing. So they're leaning forward in their chairs. They're listening to me. Now, in the last 10 minutes, I can segue into, I found all these adventures as the enormous source of meaning in my life at a certain point, and then I realized they weren't enough. And now I found the adventures someplace else. I find them not in the adventures of the body, but adventures, if you will, of the soul, adventures of the spirit, adventures of what can I do to solve public problems and make life better instead of worse. And now they're listening. And in the last 2 or 3 minutes, I can say, I don't think I'm that unique in that regard. I think it's the same for everybody in this room. We're all looking for something that makes our life meaningful, right? You look in the mirror in the morning, and somewhere deep inside, although you may be worried about the third quarter earnings statement, when you look at that face in the mirror, what you're really concerned about is who you are and what you're doing on the planet. I mean, that does occur to you, right? You're not here on the planet just to take up space. And if that's not it, then what is it? We all think about that. The question of meaning, the question of purpose. And they all nod. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then I say, well, I'll tell you what. The quest for purpose, the quest for meaning is the most important quest any human being has ever embarked on. And I'm guessing that goes back to the Neanderthals. And I've seen all kinds of people go down the wrong place. Like me, I thought that the meaning in my life was physical adventure, and now I don't think that anymore. I think the real meaning in my life is service, some kind of service. And I'm not talking about sackcloth and ashes. I'm not talking about becoming Mother Teresa. I'm not talking about running a nonprofit. You can live a life of service and be a businessman, an entrepreneur, building a fine product, selling it at a fair price with good labor conditions and mindful of environmental considerations and being a good neighbor in the communities where your companies operate. All that is a service. So look for the kind of service that you can provide. Look at who you are, your resources, your skills, and then out of that, figure out what you can do that's a service. What serves humankind? Go ahead, make cars, make chairs, be of service, be a neurosurgeon, be a barber, be anything. You can always find some way of being of service. And that's how I end it. I leave them with not an impossible task. I just say, look, we all agree that the most important thing in your life is that search for meaning. All I'm suggesting is that the next time you think this way, perhaps looking up at a starry sky or taking a quiet walk in a nearby park, you look at something beyond the third quarter earnings. You look at something beyond that and see where you might retune your life a little bit and look at ways you can be of help. That's pretty effective. I mean, I'm told it's pretty effective.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like a very powerful perception piece. Like it helps people kind of reset their own expectations for their life and helps them reimagine where they are and where they kind of want to be. I mean, I certainly feel like that just listening to you. It makes myself just think of, okay, what have I done with my life? Personally, I can say that one big thing is I wanted to see combat. I saw combat as a proof of pride. Like it is competence. Like I have the ability to go out to view and fight in combat and see it. And I was connected to the Marines. I mean, I was a Navy corpsman who worked with the Marines. I did 3 different deployments, and on all of them, I did not have the opportunity to see combat. I continuously applied for more dangerous missions. I continuously pushed for more things, and it just didn't work out that way. And it was actually a regret that I had. I felt like I wasn't able to prove myself because I didn't go out and do the dangerous work. I was looking for that adventure. So personally, like I truly do feel a certain kinship with the message that you're pushing out there.
So you were what, 21, 22, something like that?
I signed up when I was 17. I had my mom sign off for me. But yeah, my first deployment, I actually had just gotten my girlfriend, wife now at the time, pregnant with my oldest daughter. And I was 20 years old on my first deployment.
Yeah. Well, look, when you're 20, I don't know. It's not just young men. I don't want to be sexist here. I think young women feel it too, but maybe young men more. That all this John Wayne stuff, it's a big rush. I mean, how do you be a man? I mean, I've written essays about that because I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I do a lot of mentoring. And there's enormous temptations to be a man, to fall into men are tough, silent, and violent, and they never cry, and they don't show their emotions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that leads to a crap life, as far as I'm concerned. And I've tried to explain that in a number of speeches and essays about what I've learned about becoming a man. I don't do it anymore because I'm 82, so I can't really do it. But for a long time, I would take young men, especially young men who were in some kind of trouble, um, uh, drugs, whatever, and I'd take them out on mountain climbing trips. And then I'd put a rope around them and ask them to follow me up a cliff, and we'd be up there hanging on to a little nubbin somewhere on a little ledge 200 feet above the ground, and they'd be pissing in their pants, and we'd talk about being a man. And we get back down after they'd experienced this kind of real fear, legitimate fear, and how to get out of legitimate fear, how to deal with legitimate fear. And we get the conversations around the campfire that evening were always way more honest than they would be if we were doing it in the living room someplace. I get to talk to young men about what being a man is. Yeah, being a man is climbing a cliff. You're damn right it is. Being a man is being tough because it goes back thousands of years. We're providers and stuff. Women now, of course, are providers as well, but that's embedded in us, and we got to recognize that. So I have a lot of problems sometimes with American education, which seems to ignore all that. And not understanding that men still have a lot of these atavistic urges and stuff, and you got to deal with them. Otherwise, they're gonna go on drugs. They're gonna get violent. They're gonna join gangs. I mean, what are they joining gangs for? Are they joining for a sense of belonging? But there's no sense of belonging anyplace else because the world won't let them. They're not supposed to show their feelings anyway. So they join a gang, but they don't have to. They're all, hey, bro, and they're all tough stuff. Where they should be learning that, yeah, it's okay to cry. And it is okay to cry. It is okay to really care for other people and to use your toughness, for example, to solve tough problems. I mean, like, wading into that situation in Cambodia or taking those risks I've taken. It's tough guy stuff. I mean, I've done a lot of tough guy stuff. And even at 82, man, you don't want to mess with me. I'm a very tough guy. But I'm tough in the sense of realizing that the toughness that really matters is a kind of spiritual toughness, a willingness to be honest with yourself, a willingness to look beyond yourself and see what needs fixing, and then using your manhood and your skills to fix it or help fix it. And so there's a lot to learn there from young men, and I'm not sure our educational system is doing that.
Do you have a recommendation for a random guy right now, like someone that might be going through this, like you said, a young man? Because I certainly see it. I can feel it. I felt it myself. I still feel it now. Like, it feels like it's never enough. Like, you always want to do more. You work out, you push. So physically you get yourself ready, and then mentally you go out and you kind of challenge yourself. But is there something that you would recommend to someone?
Wow. Broaden the series of contact, for example, and most of all, look for mentors. That's the key. I didn't have that as a young man in many ways. The mentors I had, the first mentor I had was I went to sea when I was 17 on a freighter. In those days, no container ships, just freighters run by 50 or 60 really tough guys. So I'm up on this freighter at 17 years old, and the very first day, another crewman comes up to me and makes a sexual advance, and another crewman comes up, grabs this guy around the throat, slams him against the bulkhead, beats the shit out of him, throws him down on the deck, and says if he so much puts his blankety-blank hand on me again, he's going to take his blankety-blank body part and shove it up his blankety-blank blank. Oh, man, I sat there, because my own father was a very gentle guy. I loved him, but he was super gentle, always getting pushed around. So anyway, this guy's name was Roy. He was a 250-pound black guy who worked in the engine room. And I looked at Roy and said, that's the kind of man I want to become. Yes! And I went down to my room, that cabin that night, and I stood in front of the mirror, and I practiced slamming an imaginary foe against the wall. I practiced cussing like Roy was cussing. The next year, I was hitchhiking in Algeria, hitchhiking when there was still a colonial war going on. And I stayed one night with a bunch of French foreign legionnaires who were just like Roy. They were big, tough guys, covered with tattoos, taking on the whole rebel army with a couple of handguns and stuff. And then I got into, of course, tough guys in the movies and books and stuff. And so my whole original mentors were all models of violence. And that's where I took it. Now, if I had different models, if there had been a tough guy, a good tough guy, when I was 15, 16, 17, could have made a difference. Someone who had taken me aside, maybe after a fight or something, and says, hey, let's sit down and talk about this. What do you think it is to be? What's growing up with you? I mean, they're just talking to me, providing an alternative. Whereas I was terribly bullied as a young kid, because I grew up so much so fast that I was so uncoordinated. I couldn't do athletics or whatever. So I got beaten up a lot. And my own father was a weak guy, physically weak guy. And I grew up in a very quiet city where nothing happened. And, I didn't have the models of manhood that I needed. So I think the answer to the question is find the right models and keep searching until you do. Look, of course, in your own family. Maybe you're lucky. Maybe your dad is that kind of model, or maybe your Uncle Joe, maybe your grandfather, whatever. That's why I started this. The one reason I started this TikTok series, because I don't have it with me, but I have a great leather bomber jacket. And I put it on, and I look really tough, And I start by saying, my name is John Graham. I'm the badass granddad you didn't know you had. And here to tell you another story of my adventures. And then I proceed. I mean, I'm tough, right? But the stories I tell are all end with a life lesson, which is about some kind of service, some kind of dealing with fear, some kind of ways of assembling courage and compassion. And then I write. I mean, I write as much as I can, and from my own experience about the transitions to manhood for young men. But there's so few models out there. There's so few models. And I think social media makes it worse, because there's so much less physical contact between people. And there's so much. Oh yeah, you as you know, you go on social media, you get all this crap on social media, and a lot of it is about the manhood being violent and unfeeling and dominating women and stuff, and that's where you get a lot of this incel stuff. And these young men have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea of alternatives for their lives, because they're stuck on their phones instead of looking for real men. Their dad, their uncle, the local barber, somebody who can give them an alternative view of some male, somebody with a penis who is tough but compassionate. And that's the key.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson has this really nice saying, a man should be violent but be able to control it. So you should have the capability for violence but not use it.
Well, yeah, okay. I have some issues with Jordan, but yeah, basically.
Very well.
And Robert Bly also is someone else who has written a long time ago. But there are others out there, and it's not that hard to do Google searches and to ask other people. Perhaps ask someone that you trust, some male or some person, not just a male. Ask someone you trust about books about growing up and about manhood that might present an alternative view to what you get on these horribly destructive websites that they can dial in on their phones. Because the role models are out there. You just need to find them, and they're in people's lives. But they need to be more evident. And the other thing is, how to say this? I think women should be more welcoming. I think women can do some things too. Of course, they have all kinds of criticisms because of the shit they're dealing with, and their mothers and grandmothers have struggled for women's rights, and women are gradually gaining them, not to the full extent, but so things are a lot better than in the 50s, for example. But I think women need to be more understanding, I think, and understand where men are coming from, and that if they don't get a compassionate response in the first the first conversation, that's okay. Just keep at it, because they're dealing with someone who is trained not to give you a compassionate response, who's trained to look at you as an object. Well, maybe you can gently tell him that you're not an object, you're a peer, you're just as smart and tough as he is, but that you'd really like to have a conversation with him because he's interesting, etc. In other words, that those kinds of conversations. But I find too many young women are just too dismissive of men, and believe me, I understand that. Some of these guys are just horrible, and their attitudes toward women are just horrible, and they deserve every kind of criticism you can think about. But other men, young men, are just struggling. They're just struggling. They're looking for role models, and they're looking for some avenue to the opposite sex that is not domineering. Some attitude towards sex that will eventually lead to stable relationships and stable marriages and families, instead of domineering relationships, which lead to, wife beating and all the rest of the shit going on now, because men have never learned to control their anger, as Jordan Peterson put it, or control their violence. They've never learned that because no one ever taught them that. A lot to say about that. We go on all day, but
I'm about it. You've traveled all over the world. Culturally, do you see that there is a difference in the dynamic of men and women? I mean, obviously there's a difference, like culturally, but would you say that there is one that is more right in your eyes morally?
No, I've been around a lot. And I think the same thing is true every place that I have been. Men are trained by their culture, at least a large part of their culture, to be tough, unfeeling, and often violent. And men need to untrain themselves, and role models are important every place. Of course, there are cultural differences, like in the tribal situations in Sierra Leone. It's a whole different than being in Portland, Oregon. Of course, there are differences. But I think that the essential thing, the male-female thing, first of all, males and females are really vastly different. I'm sure you've discovered this in 29 years. So you need a lot of compassion. Each sex needs a lot of compassion in dealing with the other and understanding that the other is never going to be you. I take great issue with those men that write books that essentially say, you young men have to learn to be like women. Oh, they don't say it quite like that, but they say, oh, the problem is you don't cry at movies. The problem is you don't and they want men to be like women. Oh, that's stupid. That drives men crazy. That drives them into the far side. No, you want men to be men, but at the same time, you want them to be compassionate men. You want them to have courage and compassion. But the idea that men should become women is one of the worst ideas that I've ever come across in terms of helping men become useful human beings. Men should be men. We are men. We're different.
I like that. Men should be men. Absolutely. I have a question for you, and I think it's very unique to you specifically. Like, I'm interested in your perspective because of how much you've done and are still going. Is there ever enough? Is enough a real thing? Or do you just go full force till the end?
Why should I stop? Man, so sooner or later I'm going to die. Of course, I understand that. I try and take care of my health so that I put that as far off as I possibly can. But, people talk about retiring, and I just laugh at them. Retire from what? Retire from life? I don't think so. I'm having the time of my life. I mean, I love being on shows with really smart interviewers like yourself and having this back and forth. I love writing. I love talking to people, and mostly I love the feedback. I mean, I spend 4 or 5 hours a week just on managing my, how shall I say this, my fan mail from TikTok. All these young people send me messages, and I thought at first, oh, I'll get messages, but they'll be snarky ones like, who is this old fart? Who is this old fool trying to send? No, they're not. They're saying, first of all, half of them are saying, keep it up. I really respect you, whatever. But the other half are asking me questions and making comments about really heartfelt things, although we've never met. Like, wow, enjoyed your story about that. Well, I'm in some place and I'm just scared to do it. Or I'm in this real pickle, or I would like to do this and don't know how. Can you, and I'll sit down, like I say, I'll spend 4 or 5 hours a week on my quote fan mail. Because these are heartfelt questions, and maybe long distance, I'm becoming a little bit of a role model for that person, although we'll never meet. And no, enough is. I mean, what is enough? I mean, I don't even understand the question.
No, yeah, absolutely. Like that's one of the things that I'm curious about right now is I always look out. I don't know if it's an ambition thing or whatever, but I view my life as projects. I have right now my nonprofit that I am working at as the HR director. I have ThoughtForge with the podcast. I have, my Omni HR with my HR consulting agency, and I'm enjoying each facet of my life. Like each of these, even this past weekend, I ended up going camping with the scouts with my daughter and my family. And then as soon as we came back on Sunday, I spent the time doing household stuff. So like landscaping outside. My wife was basically like, pick up those rocks and move them over there. And while doing it, she looked at me and she was like, I'm so happy you're not a pussy. And I'm just like, you're right. Like this is how it is.
Yeah, isn't that ironic? Because I found that a lot of women are very askance about men who are half-formed and deep into violence and misogyny, but they kind of like a quote real man. They kind of like a guy that can lift a heavy rock and move it from one side of the yard to the other. And they may not say so, but it's true. This doesn't mean that what does it not mean? We have men and women need to have enormous respect for each other and understanding that we're better in some aspects and worse in some others. I mean, there's some areas of life, like trying to explain to me what someone else is feeling, for example. I'll always ask my wife, Ann, for her opinion, because I'm liable to miss something, because she's just more attuned to that. I struggle, but not quite there the way that she is. I mean, her intuitions are different than mine. On the other hand, there are some other areas where I think my intuition, especially when it comes to conflict, are maybe better than hers, or whatever, or we need to talk. And that's the key, is talking and forming relationships. We haven't talked about that, but a key element in my growth has been a wonderful marriage with this woman that started the Giraffe Heroes Project, Ann Medlock. And we talk and talk and talk. Been married 43 years now, and we're well aware of the differences between us. And yeah, we fight because sometimes those differences seem unbridgeable, but they're not. But I learned so much from her, and I think she learned something from me. So relationships are important. And relationships mean, of course, that you need to know how to form a relationship. And you can't form a relationship, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual, you can't form a relationship unless you learn to have a lot of respect for the prospective partner. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
I feel like respect is really missing in the current dating pool. I mean, I say this as someone who's been married for years, so not in the dating pool, but I, very similar to you, I'm sure, like see a lot of the current generations and the newer ones coming out, and even some of my generation. It's a completely different dynamic. People aren't trying to settle down. And I think that a big part of that is respect. They're not respecting the other gender for who they are. And they don't have the self-respect either. And I think that's definitely a very challenging part with the current group.
Well, let me ask you a question. Why do you think that's so?
I think that there have been changes culturally. So throughout time, there's always been an upswing and the downswing. There's always been challenges. So the Vietnam time frame, you had the war fighters, you had the hippies, right? Like there were always the woke culture kind of always existed. They just had different hats and different labels. I think that at the same time as that, what people viewed as classically attractive has also changed. You had the slim fit for men in the 50s. You had a bulkier Arnold Schwarzenegger era. Like, things kind of change as far as what people find attractive. And I think right now, there's been such a break in, like you said, women and men are fight for equality, which is not a negative fight. It's almost like an overstep. People have left the idea that women have their strengths. They are typically the caregiver. They typically have more compassion. They're more kind. They're able to be more sentimental, while men are more of the physical caregivers. They are more of the dominant, like their ambition drives them. So back in the day, like we talked about, like Neanderthals and like back in the ancient Homo sapiens, it was all about the men would go out, they would do the tough work, they would do the manly work, they would bring food back, they would go hunting. And that hasn't changed. That dynamic has stayed the same, but that equality that came forward, it's not negative, but it has kind of reversed the roles a little bit. So now females are acting more like men in the dating realm, and that causes a lot of structural issues to the teamwork that I think that was supposed to be there. Because that is what a relationship is. It's supposed to be teamwork. I'm good at one thing, you're good at another. When we work together, we can combat whatever comes our way. And that's not happening anymore.
Yeah, well, the older I get, especially living with a terrifically able and compassionate and courageous human being, my wife Anne, who obviously is female, the older I get, the more I realize that these differences are not as big as they thought, and that obviously women are just as smart as men and just as capable, and they can be fighter pilots and all the rest of it. I get that, but I think one has to be a little bit careful. I'm not sure that men are less compassionate than women, but we certainly are trained not to show it. And that's not so good. I mean, it's a subtle difference. Yes, men must be men, and yes, there are differences, but we got to be really aware that there's some not to exaggerate them, test the differences, and don't make them any bigger than they naturally are. And part of that is being aligned and partnered with a woman who is a real woman, and the two of you sitting down and talking and laughing about the differences between you, and then you can really begin to learn, as I have from Anne, that I have exaggerated the differences between you, because there's some areas where I think, oh, I should be doing that, and she's done it perfectly well, and the reverse is true as well. But then there are other times, as I said 5 minutes ago, when there's just some areas of life, some areas of feeling that are just beyond me. I just have to say, Anne, what do you think? What are you going to do, Anne? Anne, tell me what's going on here, and she will do the same thing. But you want to be careful about not making those any bigger than they are, and working with the differences. I mean, I wrote one of the chapters of my first book, which is called Outdoor Leadership, was about women in leadership. And I remarked on the fact that men and women lead remarkably the same, but there are some ways in which women make better leaders than men, and some ways the reverse is true. And I think women and men will agree with it. I would, for example, would really like to see a woman president of the United States and more women in senior political positions, because I think they're probably a little bit less likely to get us into, for example, idiotic wars like in Vietnam and Iraq. A little bit less than men, because there's less adrenaline flow. Less adrenaline, less, they're more likely to Yeah, they're more likely to make some of the mistakes that have created some awful problems in our cultures over the last couple of centuries. So, yeah.
You wrote a blog post, How to Be a Man, in
Mm.
2018. So it's been 7 years since then. Do you feel like there's any differences like in the writing? Do you think there's any differences kind of from that article to now? Or is it truly the same values, the same truths that were then, or the same values and truths that are now?
I think the values and the truths are the same. It's been a huge difference, though, and that's the internet and cell phones, you know? Because when I wrote that article, you didn't pick up a cell phone and weren't suffused with 1,000 options of websites and stuff, many of which are really awful in terms of their depictions of women, for example, women as objects and men as the only superheroes. It's interesting because sometimes, it's a back and forth thing too. I mean, it's like things are always like that. Changes always swing back and forth and back and forth. I kind of laugh now because you look at a lot of action heroes and action hero movies, and who does most of the punching and shooting these days? It's usually some female hero dressed in black vinyl, and it's saying, "Hey, wait a minute, that's supposed to be Tom Cruise." No, wait a minute. Okay, fine.
Definitely.
I'll get used to it.
Well, it's definitely an interesting dynamic there. You're right. There have been a lot of shifts in entertainment and media. Do you think they're positive or are they negative? Like having females in more dominant and more like main roles where, like you said, they are a little bit more violent. Like, is having more action stars positive?
Oh yeah, I do. But like I said, let's face it. Things are back. It's a pendulum, and it's fine with me. If things go a little bit overboard in that direction, it's probably a good thing because in 20 years they're going to settle back, and we'll come closer to a median where there's a proportion of action heroes who are men and a proportion of action heroes who are women. And I would love to see movies in which a female's ability to solve tough and violent problems is really realistic. I mean, for example, I don't know, solving a problem through guile and craftiness, and but the idea, which you see in some movies, of a 110-pound woman beating up on a 250-pound guy with huge muscles is not realistic. Man, come on, don't give me that. I get that a woman can aim and shoot a weapon or use a knife as well as a man can, but some of the physical violence things have taken the pendulum. But I just kind of laugh and smile because things go back and forth and back and forth. I'm like, well, look what's happened. This all began before you were born, but man, I grew up in the 50s when the rights of black people weren't even secured yet. The Civil Rights Act hadn't been invented and all that, and now, we've had a black president, and you look at any movie now, and you're colorblind. It's like, oh, that neurosurgeon is a black guy. The head of detectives is a black woman. The president of the United States is a black woman. In that movie, no one thinks about it anymore. It's like, okay, blackness is part of us. I mean, God knows I'm not naive. There obviously racial problems remain, but boy, the tremendous gains we've made since the 50s, they're pretty enormous. And I'm hoping now the same thing will be for men. We're in a stage now where men don't have a lot of role models, and the more role models they have, a lot of them are pretty negative, and it's all amplified with social media. 60% of the women in colleges now are 60% of college graduates now are women. And it'll shift. It'll come. The pendulum will swing back and forth. But men have to be able to change too. I mean, and a lot of that, as I keep saying, is through role models and just listening and looking around and putting down the phone and talking to people and figuring things out for yourself. I mean, does it really work that I don't express my feelings? I mean, I get up with this clenched stomach, and I get up and I'm angry all the time, and and yet if I had an avenue for the anger I felt, what happened last night, it would have been a whole lot better. But I didn't have an avenue for that anger. I didn't dare express my feelings. And I need more men friends. I mean, I make it. I mean, I think it's really important for men to hang out with men and to talk about these things. That's something else we haven't talked about. Yeah, men's groups. I don't mean organized men's groups for every Thursday night. You can do that. Fine, that's fine. But I do it in the outdoors. I love to go on tough trips, really tough trips. And some of them are really physically tough, and it's just men. And quite frankly, some of them I want just to be men, because we talk about sit around the campfire, and there's a certain freedom. Let's face it, there's a certain freedom when it's five guys talking around a campfire. You don't have to be so damn careful with your language and whatever. And women do the same thing. I mean, and it's important. It's important, and so that's important too, because a lot of things get discussed that are important. For me, it's around a campfire on a climbing trip, and for other people, it's something else.
What do you do in your spare time? Like, or I don't know if spare time is the right word. Throughout like a week or a month, what do you find takes up the most of your time?
Communicating, working with books and blogs and podcasts like this one's, and interviews, and with the Giraffe Heroes Project, my wife and I take some trips, but we don't do a lot of that. Spend a lot of time with each other. I sleep more than you do, I bet. I sleep 9 hours now. I seem to need that at 82. Exercise is important. I probably spend an hour and a half every day exercising, no longer running. I certainly can't run marathons anymore, but I can walk, and I exercise, stretching and strength exercises. I stay in good shape. I don't know. The days always seem full. I mean, it's like Ann and I end our days usually by cuddling up on a big wide window seat we have, and watching a movie or an episode of a series that we like, and we just stand there holding hands and eating ice cream or whatever. And so that's like an hour every night, practically every night. Oh, also, I've become a hell of a good cook. I spend a lot of time cooking. That's a good pastime. I only started because Anne broke her wrists about 7 or 8 years ago, really shattered it. And so I had no choice. And I love her too much just to go to the grocery store, pull out something in plastic and slap it in a pan. And we didn't have enough money to do takeout every night. So I learned how to cook. I got some cookbooks, and I started, and now I'm pretty damn good cook. Yeah, I'm going to make some short ribs tonight, for example, with garlic cream sauce, and it's going to be fantastic. So cooking has become a really good pastime for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, that does sound great. If you ever want to share, let me know.
Yeah, and here, cooking, of course, with women's work. Well, I don't know why, because it's a lot of fun, and it takes. You got to be meticulous. You got to be thorough. You got to have patience. All these things make a good cook, And you also have certain sensitivities, and it's brought out. I mean, the fact that I can tell the difference between 2 Indian spices now just by putting them on my finger, it means that I'm, there are sensitivities in me that apply to other areas of my life. I can be more sensitive in understanding when I see someone's frown. Why are they frowning? I can figure that out as well as a woman can. I can, yeah. It's fascinating being a human being. It really is, because there's so much to learn. And you asked me, what do you say? You didn't say retire. When have you had enough?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, whatever. I mean, you never do, because there's always stuff to learn. I mean, it's amazing what there is to learn out there. I don't need much to learn about the world anymore. I've been in just about every country on the planet, I guess, and I've solved every different kinds of. I've been involved, not solved every different kind of crisis you can think of. But there's always something coming up. Always something coming up. It may be a great grandchildren, toddler, 5 years old, 6 years old. Ask me a question that makes me think. I never thought of that. I'll think about it. So being open to new things, that's really important as you grow older. And this is not about being male or female. It's just about aging, growing older. You need to always be open to new ideas. And I try to do that. And the new ideas might be a new recipe using some new vegetable that I never cooked before, or it might be meeting someone that I was pretty sure I wouldn't like, but meeting them anyway just to see what happens or whatever. But always be open to new stuff. Always be young. I mean, that's the point, I guess. Always be young. I can see just from the smile on your face and what you've done and what I've learned about your background from your LinkedIn profile. I mean, it's like, yeah, just always be young. Always be open to new experiences. And that'll also help with the manhood issue, being open to new experiences. Like, go ahead and cry on a movie, for Christ's sake. And so if someone sees you crying, because the ending of a beautiful ending to a movie, so what? So what? I cry every time I see the movie Platoon, for example. I don't know if you read it, but it's a very, very sad movie about the Vietnam War, which I was all too close to. I never come out of theater without tears streaming down my face. And I'm not ashamed of them. That movie really moves me. Because I've been there. I felt that pain. Yeah.
So if there was one trick, one tip, one thing that you could tell to someone to help them in any way, be the mentor that they're looking for, blanketed statement, what would you say?
Never give up on the search for what makes your life meaningful. Never give up on the search for what makes your life meaningful. And if you come up with an idea and it doesn't quite sit right, then you're not there. Keep working on it. For me, I thought for a long time, as I said, it was an adrenaline rush, or for a lot of people, some of my friends, it's money and power. Oh, it's not there either. It's other stuff. And my experience is it's some kind of service, some kind of giving back. But find it. Don't stop till you do. And on the path there, we're probably not going to walk that path alone. You're going to need role models. You're going to need older, wiser, compassionate people around you, both men and women, who can sit you down and listen to whatever you have to say, maybe drop a word here and there. So in that quest for meaning, don't be afraid to seek help, talk to people, find role models, judge the information that comes into you. For God's sake, be very, very careful with the internet, and don't accept the bullshit that you find there. Test it, test things out. Is that true? Is that valid? Is what that guy doing, what she's suggesting, does it make sense, or is it making the world a worse place? Is it making people more violent, more misogynistic, more unfeeling, or the opposite? So test information that comes in from any source, and try and seek the truth for yourself. So truth seeking through communications, role models, above all linked to a never-ending quest for meaning. That's the key, never-ending quest for meaning. Don't stop. And once you've found it, as I think I found it, then look at ways to make it real. Look for the tactics to make that meaning even more real. The different ways you can help, the different ways you can be of service. And that means taking into account who you are, your own skills, your own resources, your own likes and dislikes. I mean, if you're really good with math, then maybe what you do has something to do with figuring things out. And if you're really artistic, maybe what you do is something to do with the arts. I mean, it just makes sense.
That's awesome. That's so great. John, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. Thank you so much for your words. I mean, the message was more than I could have possibly hoped for. Thank you.
Well, you're a terrific interviewer, and you drew me out, and I'm just delighted to do it. And I look forward to more stuff like this, and I really thank you for doing this, and others who are doing similar podcasts. This is a great way to communicate, and because it's honest and it's open and pretty much free of bullshit, and it's an important thing for you to do. And I want to thank you again for asking me on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and have a great night, everybody.
You too.